The rain poured down in silver sheets, drumming softly against the old cafe window where Ayaan sat, his fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee he'd long forgotten to sip. The city outside was blurred, lights smeared into streaks of gold and red through the raindrops. He glanced at his watch again. She was late. He'd waited years for this day, a single meeting that felt heavier than all the heartbreaks and regrets he'd carried. Today, he would finally meet the girl who had changed his life without even knowing it. Then, the cafe door opened, and she walked in. Her name was Hiba. Ayaan had met her 2 years ago, not in person, but through letters. It started when both of them had been patients in the same hospital, him, after an accident that had left scars across his leg and face, her, because of a rare skin condition that kept her away from the sun, from crowds, from everything people called normal. They had exchanged words before they ever saw faces. Ayaan had left a note in the hospital library one day, tucked inside a poetry book, not knowing who would read it. The note had said, "If you're reading this, I hope you know you still matter, even if no one tells you that." 2 days later, he found another note in the same book. "Maybe I needed to hear that more than I realized. Thank you. H." That's how it began, a silent conversation between two broken souls. For months, they exchanged letters. No names, no pictures. Just raw words, words that carried pain, hope, and dreams too fragile to say aloud. Ayaan told her about the accident that ended his basketball dreams, how the mirror had become his enemy. Hiba told him about her insecurities, how people stared at her skin, how beauty felt like a world she wasn't invited into, and somehow, in the middle of all that pain, they started to heal each other. But when Ayaan was discharged, he left one last letter, with his name and number, hoping she'd call one day. She never did, until last week. A simple text had come late at night. "Ayaan, it's me. H." They talked for hours, nervous, awkward, emotional, and finally, agreed to meet at this cafe. Now, as she stood by the door, scanning the room with hesitant eyes, Ayaan's heart thudded in his chest. He recognized her immediately, not from a photo, but from her posture, the way she clutched her bag, the way her eyes darted down when someone looked too long. He waved. She saw him and froze for a second before walking slowly toward him. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled back her hood. Ayaan's breath caught, not because of shock, but because of how wrong the world had been about beauty. Her face bore uneven patches of pale and dark skin, signs of the condition she'd told him about. Her features were soft but unsure, like someone who had spent too long trying to hide. When she met his eyes, she whispered, barely audible over the rain, "I'm not beautiful like you expected." For a moment, the cafe seemed to go silent, just the hum of rain and the ache of vulnerability hanging in the air. Ayaan smiled, slow and genuine, his eyes soft. "You're perfect." Her lips parted, as if she didn't know whether to believe him. But Ayaan meant it, not out of pity, not as comfort, but as truth, because beauty wasn't in her skin. It was in the courage it took for her to show up. They sat down, words hesitant at first. She kept tugging at her sleeves, avoiding his eyes. He talked about small things, the weather, the music, how the coffee here was too bitter, until he saw her shoulders relax. Then, softly, he asked, "Why didn't you ever call after I left the hospital?" She sighed, looking down. "Because I thought you'd change your mind if you saw me. You sounded whole." "I wasn't." He shook his head. "No one's whole, Hiba. We just pretend better some days." There was silence for a while. Outside, the rain began to ease. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "People used to stare. Kids would point. I stopped going out. I thought if I stayed invisible, I couldn't disappoint anyone's idea of beauty." Ayaan listened. Every word she said reminded him of the nights he'd refused to leave his room, ashamed of the scar that ran from his jaw to his ear, a reminder of the crash that ended the life he once knew. He leaned forward. "I know how that feels. After my accident, I thought the same. I'd avoid mirrors. I thought no one would look at me the same way again. But then one day, I realized something: the world only sees what you let it. If I walked like I was broken, that's all they'd see. But if I walked like I still mattered, they couldn't ignore it. Hiba's eyes shimmered with tears. You make it sound easy. He smiled gently. It's not. But healing never is. They sat there for hours, talking about pain, art, music, and all the small things that still made life bearable. She told him she'd started painting again, abstract pieces, full of color, emotion, and chaos. He told her about his new job teaching kids basketball, not because he could play anymore, but because he wanted them to learn how to get back up after falling. By the time they stepped outside, the sky had cleared. The air smelled of rain and hope. Hiba looked up at the night, at the faint stars breaking through the clouds. For the first time in years, she didn't hide her face. Ayaan walked beside her, careful not to make her feel small or fragile. And when they reached the corner where their paths split, she turned to him. Do you really think I'm perfect? She asked, half smiling, half afraid that he nodded. I think you're real. And that's rarer than perfect. She laughed softly, tears mixing with the leftover rain on her cheeks. That night, Hiba went home and stood before her mirror, the same mirror she'd covered for years. For the first time, she didn't look away. She touched her reflection gently and whispered, maybe perfect isn't what I thought it was. Weeks passed. Their friendship grew stronger. They met every Friday at the same cafe, talking about dreams, fears, and everything in between. Ayaan noticed how Hiba began wearing brighter colors, how she started meeting his eyes without flinching, and one afternoon, she brought a small canvas with her. On it, she'd painted two silhouettes sitting in a rain-drenched cafe, one scarred, one shaded, both surrounded by light. She smiled as she handed it to him. You taught me to see beauty differently. He shook his head. No. You taught yourself. I just reminded you it was still there. That painting hung in Ayaan's home for years, a reminder that beauty is not flawless skin or perfect faces, but the courage to be seen exactly as you are. And whenever people asked about the girl in the painting, he would say, she's the bravest person I've ever met. The one who whispered, I'm not beautiful, and showed me what true beauty really looks like. Because in a world obsessed with perfection, two broken people had found something far more extraordinary, acceptance, and that, perhaps, is the most beautiful thing of all. Moral: beauty fades, scars remain, but courage, kindness, and truth shine longer than any reflection. Sometimes the most beautiful souls are the ones who've learned to love their broken pieces.